Hey everyone, so I'm here with Nomiki Konst. She actually just got done serving on the DNC Unity Reform Commission, and she's here to explain to us a little bit more in depth as to what actually happened, what got passed, and what the outcome will actually be if the greater DNC does vote to adopt these rules. So Nomiki, thank you so much for being on the show. It is so great to have you.
It is such an honor being on the show because I watch you and you have that special magic that makes everybody want to keep watching you, which I think is like the secret to online television shows. I guess you would call them online shows. Is that you just want to keep watching old, like I go way back. I was watching primary videos the other day.
No kidding. Well, that makes me feel so good coming from you because I'm also a fan of yours. And I know that everyone on the internet in the progressive community is talking about the now viral video of you railing against the DNC's lack of transparency. And I think that the minute where you accidentally said fuck, we all lost it watching it. It was amazing. It was magical. It brought so much joy to my life. So thank you for that.
I've been saying this to a lot of people, so forgive me, but who knew that a conversation about bylaws and budgets at a Reform Commission meeting on C-SPAN on a Saturday could go viral. I guess I figured something out.
Yes.
You know, maybe that's what the Democrats need to do when they're fighting the tax bill. They should just go on a rant and start dropping F-bombs left and right.
It gets people's attention. I mean, you're proof now of that.
It does. I do think that there are different standards for our community than, say, the general American people. But, you know, I was surprised, I will say this, that it wasn't just progressives. I went on my Facebook. I was at an event last night, a Christmas party in New York, a political Christmas party. And, you know, pretty establishment people were like, you know what, it needed to be said. So something's happening, which we can get to. And I think this video was sort of indicative of that, since it wasn't so much about Bernie versus Hillary. It was more about, you guys, we lost a lot. What are we going to do?
Right.
People are looking for that.
Yeah, you laid it out very clearly. I mean, the way that you described, this is what pain looks like. It's not just Donald Trump being in the White House. That's part of it. But, I mean, people are hurting on an individual level because of the incompetence of the Democratic Party. So let me ask you this. As a member of the DNC Unity Reform Commission, you served alongside other individuals that Bernie Sanders nominated, such as Nina Turner, Jane Cleave, I believe James Zogby as well. So people who were going to bat for us. So at the end of the day, you guys had to compromise with Hillary Clinton's supporters and supporters of Chairman Perez as well. And you guys actually didn't have as many representatives as they did. So at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, do you feel as though the process itself was fair and they adequately listened to the concerns of yourself and people on the progressive side?
I do. And I was concerned all the way up until the vote, frankly. Or maybe say minutes before the vote, because we knew where they were going on a lot of issues. We didn't know. I mean, when we went to fight at the platform committee, or even in the rules committee for my colleagues who were on the rules committee, you know, it was a different situation. They had whips. They had a sitting person. They had somebody who they thought was going to be president. And so I think the dynamics were always a little bit different. Of course, they have phone calls and they're working together. But, you know, some people that were appointed were consultants. Some people were elected officials. Some people were state party chairs. So, you know, their master was different, meaning an elected official has to represent ultimately the people. You know, the buck stops when they have to get reelected and go back to their districts and talk to their constituencies. You know, a state party chair, a former state party chair, has to respond to the needs of the state party, meaning they're the ones, which I can get to later, who have the burden of organizing a state party with very little money or support and no presidential race. Consultants, you know, they have their own interests at heart. So I think what ended up happening, at least on my side, you know, there were different conversations happening simultaneously, because there were different topics I was on the party reform committee, we call it. So there was a superdelegate committee, the primaries, and then caucuses committee, and then that was all the presidential primary stuff, and then the party reform, which is the structural stuff within the party. So, you know, from my perspective, when it came down to getting my resolutions passed, what happened behind the scenes was I was having conversations with people that I knew had more of a responsibility to making sure that this party was sound and structured, and working with them on the language. I didn't get all of my resolutions passed. There were a couple that I was a little like, oh, darn it. But I got, and that was only like 2 or 3. But for the most part, the most controversial resolutions were passed. And I think part of that was because we made it such a big issue. You saw my video, but we were out there in the public talking about it. When reporters asked us about what was happening, we would say, the fight is really going to come down to the budget, because that's where you have. But ultimately, I think the consulting class is they're very powerful, but they're much smaller. And there are a lot of people in the party right now, in terms of the party membership and state party chairs, as I said in my video, who are really angry about the consultant class. So I did not expect to get this resolution passed. I thought it would be watered down. I didn't expect to get, a slew of other party reform resolutions passed where we added amendments. But what ended up happening was we started to get one vote here, and the Clinton people couldn't be shown as separating. So in the end, we passed, I think, like 8 or 9 resolutions unanimously.
Wow.
And I'm really proud of our side for sticking to it, for really pushing hard. It does still have to go before rules and bylaws, but I think this was the tougher fight, because this is where, in the past, when you look at other commissions, this is where stuff has kind of gone down.
Right. So yeah, thank you for representing us, by the way, because I think that, the people who were representing progressives, I was incredibly confident in. So let me ask you this, though. With everything that was passed, what are some of the bigger accomplishments that you're proud of personally? I know you guys cut superdelegates by 60%. I wish it would have been 100%, but I know that you guys fought as hard as you possibly could. So can you just kind of explain what you think are the most important resolutions that you guys got through?
I mean, I think all of them were very important. They all have different weight, because there are certain things that can be done and not done. So superdelegates, we knew going in that there was going to be a mandate that was pre-negotiated at the convention when this commission was set up. So no matter what, we knew that there was going to be a serious decrease in superdelegates. How the remaining would vote would be massaged out. And thanks to Jeff Weaver and Charlie Baker, who was on Hillary Clinton's side, and a couple of other folks who were on that committee, they really worked through that. That's the one that we knew was going to get the most attention. From my perspective, maybe I'm a little biased, but I do think that, having covered the DNC chair's race and spoken to so many DNC members who are the ultimate insiders, and hearing their frustrations and their anger with the Democratic Party that they had invested in a lot of them, their entire lives, or most of their lives, adult lives. And knowing that this wasn't just about Bernie and Hillary, this was about losing almost 1,200 seats, not counting municipalities, and that if you don't fix the structure itself or get to the core problem, it's going to be hard to make sure that the other reforms stay in place. And so the budget, to me, the party reform stuff, accountability, transparency, and having some sort of electoral oversight was very, very important to me. Banning conflicts of interests. So I got my conflicts of interest ban passed. The more specific language was not passed, but ultimately, that's about the intent. And I think that if that is violated, I think a lot of people now have a tool where they can go and complain about this. Meaning, if you are a consultant making money in the party, you have no voting in the party. That would be like if a congressperson was a lobbyist.
Right.
Well, right now, you got it all over the place. And so they're the ones who are setting the rules. They're holding, the chair accountable or not accountable. We did some stuff about, Donna Brazile brought to light the JFA agreements, the joint fundraising agreements, which I think actually ties into the superdelegates. What had happened if you recall, in 2016, or really as far back as 2015, was Secretary Clinton started getting endorsements with the superdelegates very early on, and they were disclosing that number and factoring it into the regular, the elected delegates, the pledged delegates, who had run in their communities. So what I realized was I was going back in my memory and saying, I remember when Secretary Clinton was going around the country and talking to DNC members who are superdelegates and saying things like, I will send money to your state when I'm... So that joint fundraising agreement, I believe, had a direct correlation with the superdelegate situation. So what I said to one reporter was, we disabled most of the mechanisms that can create any sort of malfeasance in this party or in the primary. Now, hopefully they will be passed. I don't, you never know what's going to happen, but we're not turning a blind eye. I mean, now people are excited and they're, ready to go. And DNC members are, writing me. And I had 3 congressmen write me that they were proud of this. I mean, it's just, I think this is what happens in revolutions is you don't know where your allies are, but the more progress you make, and Secretary Clinton is no longer there to, she's around, right? But she's not going to be president. So a lot of people aren't depending on her or afraid of her, or they don't have to align with her. I mean, look at what Gillibrand is saying now, Senator Gillibrand. So you see a lot of people that maybe have more progressive beliefs but have been holding them inside, or are progressive when it comes to voting but align themselves with the Secretary Clinton, and they're all starting to kind of come together and say, all right, now's the time. The movement is on our side. I'm willing to join forces with you now. And I like to say that to people because, a year and a half ago I said that we were really close because I knew what the delegate breakdown was. And delegates are like the most insidery people ever. Yeah. And if we were that close then, why would we give up? Why would we, take our ball and go home when we're scaring them?
Yeah. The momentum is clearly on our side, and people are watching right now. So let me ask you this, because when I was reading through the articles, I was a little bit skeptical, to be honest, even though a lot of people from the DNC Unity Reform Commission, such as yourself, have expressed optimism, because the way that I read this and interpreted it was as, well, in order to actually reduce the number of superdelegates, for instance, the superdelegates would have to vote to curtail their own power. So do you think that these changes will actually be passed by the greater DNC, or do you think it's still really a toss-up? Because you guys basically made the recommendations, and now it has to be approved by the aggregate DNC. So how do you think this is going to go? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but just based on kind of the vibe that you felt when you were there.
I think that the superdelegates that want to keep their status the most are some elected officials. Not all of them. I've talked to a lot of elected officials and congressmen who are like, yeah, I don't care. I think especially after this last time, getting phone calls, nobody wanted to be harassed. Harassed or lobbied, I'll say, potato, how you look at it. But I actually, you have to go back to 2008. Secretary Clinton wanted to eliminate superdelegates when she was running against President Obama, or at that time, Senator Obama. So this is an issue that it's become sort of partisanized, but I don't know the raw numbers, and we're probably going to get some sort of information on that or start, polling people or getting a sense. But my sense is that most people think it's outdated and it just looks bad. And the more it's discussed, the more it looks bad. Those people who are the most passionate about superdelegates, in my opinion, were on this commission because they created superdelegates. Or, they've been given some sort of information saying that superdelegates are protecting people of color in leadership, when really there's not much. That's a controversial issue. There are 2 camps that do not agree on this. I just look at the makeup of superdelegates and realized that the majority were white men, because the majority are elected, and the majority of people elected are white men. Right. But I can understand that from that perspective. But being a DNC member, or excuse me, being a pledged delegate who's been elected, kind of fixes that problem, or adding some more diversity metrics into the elected pool fixes that problem. So I didn't really always understand the superdelegate argument for diversity's sake. And I think that there was some talking points sent out early on, and we really talked through them. And the more we talked through them and presented evidence, those talking points kind of went off the table, at least in our room. They continued online. But it was very clear that the people pushing that narrative were not watching the commission at all.
And it was all available. And I know that
That sounds like you,
TYT.
Joy Reid.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're attendant.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a whole nother story. So I wanted to ask you because at the beginning of the year, back in February, when Tom Perez was elected as the DNC chairman, just hours later, we were all just shocked because well, not super shocked, but still surprised that the DNC voted down a proposal to ban lobbyist contributions to the DNC. And now, a couple of months ago, we heard that Christine Pelosi had fought to actually reinstitute a ban, and that was successful, but that kind of fell by the wayside. So is that included with these Unity Reform?
She won.
She did
won the
win.
vote. Yeah, she won the vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
So has that been voted on by the DNC already? And is that...
They voted on it. They
Okay,
voted
great.
on it at the DNC meeting in Nevada. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I think what's really interesting about this moment is this is the ultimate insider game. And some people really get that the public is paying attention. Some people are not on Twitter. Some people aren't watching YouTube. Some people are, kind of conditioned to do things the way that it's been forever. And they're really surprised when they see, like, oh my God, what are all these activists doing in the room? How did they find out about this? Or they just continue to operate as if, like, no one's paying attention on the outside. But, Christine Pelosi, and I know her last name, people, they don't understand the difference.
Right.
She is Nancy Pelosi's daughter, but she is a long-time reformer. And I've gotten to know her more so in the last year, and she will not give up on this. She did not think that lobbyists should have ever been in this party, and she lost it barely, that vote, in February, and some little game was played in the final minutes, but then she won it this last time around. So that was a big deal. That was a very big deal. And I saw an article yesterday about banning corporate money from the party. I mean, these are things that are a little complicated because I think people mix up, like, the DNC convention with the DNC as an institution, which, does have some FEC rules that they have to follow, with candidates, just regular candidates, with the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They all have to follow, the limits on donations for someone running for Congress. They're not entirely different. The DNC can take more money in a presidential year. So it gets confusing for people.
Right.
I think, my concern is more so about, the DNC is taking donor money. My concern is more so about where that money's going, because the reason why all these major donors have been giving money is because they've been sold a bill of goods saying, we need to raise $1 billion for a presidential race. And then these donors found out, wait, we lost the presidential race and you're not even giving money to the states so they can go and organize in the legislatures? And this has been operating they've been doing this out in the open for a decade. And no one stopped after the shellacking and said, hey, maybe some of those consultants we've been paying $1 billion aren't that great. Maybe we should review their contracts and see where things went wrong when we just got shellacked. Yeah. Or maybe we should take some of that presidential money, a little bit, and put it in the state party money. No. I mean, maybe our budget committee should actually be a budget committee where people meet and look at a real budget, not a pie chart.
Yeah.
So,
had it not been for your reporting, I don't think I would have known just how big of an issue these consultants were. Because you're the one who really shed light on this and just how prevalent they are, how much money they're getting paid to do, harm, presumably, to the party. Because if these are the individuals that are feeding the party advice, well, it's not really working out. Because as you stated, we lost 1,200 seats in legislatures across the country. You can't do any worse than that, possibly. So, yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me how nobody said anything. So thank you for bringing that issue to light, because I think that once you started talking about it, a lot of other people began speaking about just how big of an issue this was. Now, another thing I want to talk to you about is the progressive purge that Tom Perez recently did, because I know there had to be animosity when you guys all met. Tom Perez showed up. Can you talk about that? Because I know that you guys were pissed, and I know that he knew you guys were pissed. So how did that go? And did he say anything to you about this?
He didn't say anything to us about this. He had So just for the audience who may not be familiar, again, this is like the wonkiest stuff, and I'm just so excited that people pay attention. There were a few people. Okay, so in the fall DNC meeting a couple months ago, where we had our last DNC commission meeting, as well as the greater DNC's set of meetings where all the committees meet, and Chairman Perez put forward a nomination for at-large members, because he has the ability to do so. They're still voted on, and the Rules and Bylaws Committee member, and other it was basically at large and Rules and Bylaws committees, and some of the other committees that are smaller. What was noticeable was that there were, I think, 5 people, if I recall, who had either voted for and campaigned for Bernie Sanders and or Keith Ellison, and they were removed. And some of them, all of them actually, are very notable, longtime advocates, reformers in the party. You had, and it didn't look good either, you had the first openly gay member of the executive committee, Chairman Ray Buckley, who ran against Tom Perez. And you gave me credit for the budget conversation, but the credit really lies with Ray Buckley, because he's the one who got on stage as the New Hampshire party chair, the vice chair of the party. He got on stage during that debate and said, I've been in the party, I've been an officer who has a fiduciary duty to the party, and I have never seen a budget. And there were gasps in the audience. So he's the one who first brought that up. When I heard that, I was like, what? Oh, I'm going to explore that.
Yeah.
So that was Ray Buckley.
Okay.
He was kicked off. Then you had, so it's not just that he removed certain people, he put forward other people and didn't put anybody from our side. Our side, the reformer side is what I call it. The people, who aren't just going to be rubber stamps for the chairman.
Exactly.
Alice Germond, who was the secretary of the party, and she's, loved, and everybody, knows who she is. Bab Saperstein, the first trans member of the party leadership, longtime advocate. People were crying when she gave her closing speech. It was not a good look.
Man.
And then, of course, Dr. Jim Zogby. Dr. Jim Zogby, who I have gotten to know so well over the last year, being on this commission. We were both on party reform together, and he is the conscience of the DNC, in my opinion. He's a good person. He knows so much about the party. And if I'm forgetting one person, I apologize. It's been a couple of months. But Tom Perez removed these people, and this is, when I tried to get this banned in the URC and the Reform Commission, I put in a couple of lines for state parties, for their chairs, and for the national party, to eliminate official slate candidates. Meaning, if the chairman says, I'm going to present my slate, or a slate that kind of aligns with the chairman, for all these positions, it's still going to be voted on before the greater body. But who's going to challenge? It's a form of intimidation, frankly, and it's banned in some states. But we couldn't get it banned, and we couldn't get it banned for states like New York, where it's a major issue, because everybody on the executive committee in New York is Governor Cuomo's picking for the most part. So that was very controversial and heated. And then what had happened, and I don't know if this actually, if you guys covered this or aware of it, because it happened very quickly, that article went out and it got picked up, and there was a lot of anger from DNC members. And this is after Tom Perez had a bad week of fundraising. It was announced that the DNC only had $8 million. It was before Donna Brazil's revelations. And there was this rumor that was put out, which we now know who it came from, and it was put in a Ruby Kramer's BuzzFeed article.
Oh, right, okay.
And where she essentially reported on a rumor, right?
Yeah.
Everybody in the piece said, this isn't true. And it was reported with a headline as if it were true. And it essentially was saying that Jane Klebb, who's on the commission with us, who is the chair of the Nebraska party, Jim Zogby, and they left out this part, but it was behind the scenes. It was about me. They left it out of the article because I probably would have had a shit fit. They said that we had a goal of eliminating all of the women of color from the committee.
I remember this.
I said to Ruby, I was like, listen, if we were going to eliminate people, I would eliminate the 12 consultants who all happen to be white men in the party. Get real. And in the executive committee meeting where everybody was giving their speeches and saying, I'm so sad that I'm leaving, and people were crying. It was horrible. And Ray Buckley actually got renominated back on because somebody nominated him and he won.
Oh, good.
So there's one person there. During that, you had one of the executive committee members stand up as a woman of color, and she said, I think it's disgusting that there are some people on this committee who have been trying to eliminate the women of color from the DNC. And this person clearly had not realized that it was false. So Dr. Jim Zogby got up and he cleared it up, and he was insulted. And Tom Perez was in the room, and Keith Ellison happened to be in the bathroom, and he came back and he made very strong comments about how this was a rumor and it was ridiculous and these are not the games that we should be playing. And frankly, it was all done to distract away from Tom Perez removing all these people. But then, oh wait, there's more.
This is great.
The next day, you had longtime DNC staffer / chair of the DNC, the convention, and now I believe she's on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, Leah Daughtry, get up and give a speech, a riling speech. She's a reverend, talking about, how we can't ignore women of color in this party, and essentially bringing that rumor up again, saying there are people in this room. And people were on their feet, cheering and clapping. And it was like this, she's done a lot of hard work for this party. No one is trying to remove. I actually had to go up to them and say, you understand you're being played, right? Like, you're actually being played. They're playing you, and they're using you as cover, which is exactly the wrong thing that should be happening. No one's trying to remove you. You can give your speech, but leave the part of the rumor out. It is absolutely true that the Democratic Party does not respect women of color and women. And, that was shown in Alabama. Thank God for women of color.
Right.
To give a speech implying that a rumor that was published in BuzzFeed, which should have been removed, frankly, and I call on Ben Smith to really look into that, because that has deep consequences. That shows up in Google searches. Those names are tarnished. And frankly, I think there's reason to, actually, if they wanted to go forward legally, it is such an outrageous rumor that it was published. And it wasn't picked up by any other reporter. That's where you can pay,
for good reason.
For good reason. They have editors. It was outrageous. The drama, but that stuff to me was always about distracting away from the purge.
Right. Absolutely. And Tom Perez himself, we all saw the justification. He cited diversity as a reason for purging people who were very diverse. I think it was Babs Cyperstein who was quoted saying, look, if you want diversity, I'm one of the most diverse people ever. I'm transgender. I'm a small business owner. I'm Jewish. So what more do you want from me? So, clearly these were tactics to distract. So I'm glad that you gave us some insight there. So before we go, I just kind of wanted to go over the smaller, lesser known things that changed, because I think, like you said, these are all important because we all know about superdelegates, but a couple of other things that happened was there's going to be an ombudsman that people can basically call on to report any issues that they have with the fairness of the primaries. There's also changes to influence states to open up their primaries, which I think is huge. I think that's a phenomenal thing that they could do, because it is the case. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The national DNC, they can't compel states to open primaries, but what they're doing is basically influencing states to open primaries by saying, well, if you want to keep your same number of pledged delegates, then you have to open up your primaries or become less suppressive. So is that basically what that does?
Yeah, open primaries is a very clear definition, so we try not to use the word open primaries because it's not necessarily open primaries, but it is creating scenarios where parties can be more inclusive. We use New York as an example where I live, and I was a big advocate for this. I wouldn't shut up about New York. Every time I'd speak, I'd be like, well, in New York, everyone's eyes would go, there she goes again.
Well, I'm in Oregon and I talk about New York. It's one of the worst examples.
It actually is the worst example.
Yeah, so, it's terrible.
But, what's interesting about New York, we learned during the primary testimony, we had different experts come in and talk about, their states, the good and the bad. And the Board of Elections, the guy who came and spoke to us from the New York Board of Elections, he was like, listen, We have the second lowest turnout in the country. We have the highest concentration of Democrats, the lowest turnout for Democrats. And we're like, oh my God, this is horrible. And then he explained all of the registration dates, which, I knew, meaning they're all over the place. If you want to vote in next year's primary, you had to register to vote to change your party ID in October of this year.
That's crazy.
So, there's a million things that could happen. You could move. Last election, I had to vote. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I had to vote because I was in between. I was on the road campaigning for Bernie. So I didn't have an apartment. Literally, I didn't have an apartment. I was like staying at my friend's parents' house, who were so nice to like let me stay there when I was home for a couple of days. And I was like, how am I going to vote in the primary? Where am I voting? And so I called up the Board of Elections and they said, well, you could go and vote. You could vote by mail from Buffalo. I haven't lived in Buffalo in 18 years, but I voted by mail from my home in Buffalo because it was the only way I could vote. It was insane. But I think the key point here is the recommendations that are made. Some states, most states are Republican controlled. So you can't do much because it has to go through the legislatures. And if the Republicans legislatures, you can't pass these laws. So, the goal is we would provide legal assistance and help them, fight things during primary time. In states like New York, what we learned was all it takes is for the New York State Democratic Party to change a rule and put all the dates on the same day. We're urging states, especially Democratic states, to move all of their registration deadlines to the closest registration deadline to the election. Mm-hmm. And in New York in particular, this has been used as a mechanism not just to keep incumbents, but I think to keep certain incumbents. The governor controls the party. He essentially controls the executive committee of the party. He controls the finances of the party and doesn't release those finances to other candidates. So it's not a good look for him to have such an easy fix and not fix it. So it's a carrot and stick thing. Like you'll lose delegates, or you'll gain help, assistance in certain areas. It's actually very detailed, and it's going to be massaged out more in the next couple of weeks while we present our recommendations.
That's great. Now, another thing that I thought was really phenomenal was that they're going to be allowing absentee ballots for caucuses, which I think is huge because even though for me, theoretically speaking, I should support caucuses the way they are because that gives our grassroots candidates, the advantage. They have momentum at caucuses. But just from my perspective, like my father, for example, is in a wheelchair. So getting to a caucus would be impossible. So this really changes the game when it comes to caucuses, allowing people to basically be present without actually being there. So I thought that was huge. I think one of the biggest accomplishments. So let me ask you this, because the whole point of the Unity Reform is to make the party more democratic, to make the Democratic Party more democratic. So if all of these reforms are adopted, in your view, do you feel confident that going forward, primaries will actually be fair and we'll never have a 2016 again?
I think 2016 was a unique year, and for so many reasons. We ran a pre-recession candidate in a post-recession world against literally the most far-left grassroots candidate in the last 50 years. After Henry Wallace. I don't know if 2016 could ever happen again. just generationally, I think things are going to shift so much so. I don't think the Democratic Party has a choice at this point, and they need to be reminded over and over. The DNC membership needs to be reminded that and I said this in my closing remarks, we are what stands in the way of fascism right now. Mm-hmm. And there's really no excuse when you have a generation, most people under the age of 36 identify as progressives, but they're not identifying as Democrats. That's a problem. You were handed a generation, the largest generation in history, the most diverse generation in history, and your rules are blocking them from joining the party. How are you can't just say, join the Democratic Party, when the Democratic Party has done so many things that have hurt its brand, its brand and trust. Nobody trusts it. So how are you going to bring these people back? You got to bring them back, because the alternative is you let this small little contingency of neo-Nazis take control of the country, which they have been.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the numbers are in our favor. So I think that those are the talking points, the statements that have to be reinforced over and over, that there's nowhere else to go right now. Do we want a third party? Heck yeah. I was at the Working Families Party last night, their Christmas party, and they're operating in 17 states. But it took them 20 years to get there, and then it's still fusion in a lot of states. So it's kind of like a faction of the Democratic Party. It's not an actual party because it is so difficult to get on the ballot. It is so difficult to get federal funding. There's a million layers. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It just means that we're so close in one area. Why not do things at the same time?
Exactly. We have to have a multifaceted approach. I always say, let's go all in. Let's try to build up a third party. Let's try to draft Bernie for his own party. Let's try to reform the Democratic Party. We can't afford to not try everything in our power when we have just the craziest rogue right-wing extremist party in power everywhere. It blows my mind. So yeah, that makes me feel a little bit better coming from you, knowing that you're relatively or seemingly optimistic, right, about, you know, the prospects and whatnot. So is there anything else that you think is important that we didn't touch on before we go? Because I know we talked about a lot in that short time, and there's so much.
I think, you know, I do want to reinforce the point that Senator Sanders understands the dynamics of the party pretty well. You know, he went through a lot and had an opportunity to bring it to a floor vote at the convention and didn't. And so this commission, some people say, oh, it's a sham. Very few people are saying that now. But, you know, some people are saying, oh, it's a sham. It's a joke. They're controlling you. No, this is something that was negotiated on. And it was not an easy negotiation. I watched much of it at the Rules Committee. And it came out of the Rules Committee because Senator Sanders, in good faith, said, all right, I'm going to basically, you know, move all of my delegates to Secretary Clinton. Remember that on the floor of the convention. And he chose fighters. He didn't choose people that were going to let, you know, them pull a fast one on us. We were all very active in the primary. Many of us were involved with the platform committee and the rules committee and involved in the DNC chairs race and saw what happened there. There was no pulling a fast one on us. It doesn't mean that they're not going to try, but I just want everybody to know that we have our eyes open. And I think you saw it in my video, but, you know, I wasn't the only one who gave, you know, passionate speeches like that. Dr. Jim Zogby has just been there, you know, from the beginning. He knows the party very well. He knows all the little tricks that they play, and he would call them out. And I don't think, I mean, this is the lesson here, I think, is these are people who've been doing this stuff out in the open and are not used to being called out in the open. And so now they have nowhere to hide because they weren't doing this. You know, for the most part, they weren't doing this behind the scenes. They were doing this out in the open. And so now you have a grassroots that has been demanding reform. You have DNC members who are demanding reform because they're back in their states trying to organize and get people elected, and they don't have the tools to do so. You have DNC state party chairs who are part of this body that matters in the vote, who are trying to build their parties up and in states that could be Democratic, like Arizona, which I mentioned. And then you have some of the executive, you know, the people who are in leadership who want reform. The numbers are definitely in our favor. So I like to reinforce that over and over. And every single day, as more stories come out, more people come to our side. I get more notes from people I would never imagined. You know, Donna Brazil revealing all this. I think, you know, sometimes it takes somebody from the inside to reveal these things so that others feel comfortable coming out and saying, you know what, you're right. You're right. So if this keeps up and you guys keep the pressure, I don't see how we can't take over this party very, very soon.
That's perfect. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And we certainly will keep the pressure. We're paying attention to everything, and we're not going to back down. So thank you so much, Nomiki, for coming on the show and giving us the inside scoop. I had so many questions to ask you, so thank you so much for answering them. Can you tell us where to find you? Oh,
I'm always on Twitter. Nomiki, Nomiki Konst. Also find me on Facebook. There's a little checkmarky blue thingy on my Facebook page. I will post updates there. Oh, I'm on TYT. Hi,
Of
bury the lead
course.
there. TYT Politics, where I cover things like the Democratic Party at times, but I've been doing more. I try to focus on stories from the macro all the way down to the micro. So anything from the UK labor movement and Yanis Varoufakis, from Syriza to local races like the IDC issue in New York. I'm going to be hopefully going to Wisconsin to cover some of their movement stuff there, and I'll be back in Puerto Rico soon too. So
that's perfect.
All over the place.
Yeah. You really are all over the place. Yeah, and you're interviewing like huge people like Donna Brazile, Jeremy Corbyn, I believe. Was that you? That was you, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I watched an interview with TYT with someone, and I feel like it was Nomiki. It was a while ago. So yeah, that's perfect. Well, thank you so much. It was great having you. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the interview.
Happy holidays to everybody, and thank you.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.